Did you ever imagine we'd lose billions not through war or crisis, but through quiet footsteps walking away from the country we once called our closest friend? Canada, the calm voice in our backyard, is slipping away from American fast food without saying a word. Between 2023 and 2024, more than $2.1 billion in U.S. fast food sales disappeared across the Canadian border. Starbucks closed 144 locations. Burger King and KFC quietly shut down hundreds more. Maybe it's the prices. Maybe it's the feeling that these brands no longer represent value. Either way, something sacred is being severed. This isn't just business loss, but a cultural farewell. And if Canada no longer finds American food worth the drive, what hope is left for the places we thought would last forever? This is the Downturn Report, where the truth gets personal. And today, we will reveal 25 big restaurant chains will collapse by Canada boycotts U.S. Products number 1, KFC. There was a time when bringing home a bucket of KFC was a small celebration, a crispy piece of comfort after a long week, the smell filling the car, the sound of your kids tearing open the box. But now, even that familiar treat is slipping away, and not with a bang, but with a whisper. In 2023, a report by Consumer Reports hit like a brick through the window of trust. It exposed traces of harmful chemicals in several fast food fried chicken products, including multiple samples from KFC. What followed wasn't just a scandal, but an emotional revolt. In Canada, where generations had grown up on that red and white striped bucket. The outrage spread across TikTok and Reddit. People felt betrayed. In places like Alberta and Manitoba, foot traffic to KFC locations fell off a cliff almost overnight. One by one, customers stopped showing up. For those who grew up with KFC as a Saturday staple, the closures felt like a personal goodbye. There were no signs, no apologies, just darkness behind the windows where hot meals used to glow. From over 700 stores in the 1990s, dozens have now shuttered suddenly, and for low-income families who once leaned on a $5 fill-up to make ends meet, it feels like the rug has been pulled out from under them. Meanwhile, the U.S. is watching the same slow unravel. Ingredient prices are surging. Combo meals now cost over $12. What used to feed an entire household now barely covers one tray. And as competitors like A and W lean into organic, plant-based, and local-sourced ingredients, KFC still clings to an outdated model. Nostalgia doesn't pay at the register anymore. One Mississippi mom recently posted her heartbreak. She drove to her local KFC with her 3 kids after receiving her monthly SNAP payment, ready to surprise them with something warm and familiar. But the lights were off. The store had closed. The joy she hoped to give her children that night turned into silence. That's how it always begins. Not with outrage, but with emptiness. A locked door, a memory that used to feed the whole family. If KFC ever filled that space in your life, tell us in the comments below, because what's coming next might feel even more sad. Number 2, Subway. For 2 decades, we trusted that green and yellow promise. Eat fresh. More than just a slogan, it was reassurance. When life felt heavy, when choices were tight, Subway felt like a small win, a sandwich you could afford. But that trust didn't shatter all at once. It faded slowly, like the peeling paint on the awning of a store you hadn't realized was closed. Subway once outnumbered even McDonald's in storefronts. In the early 2000s, it was everywhere, by gas stations and grocery centers across sleepy highways. For countless Americans, especially the older generation, it was the healthier alternative. No fryer, no grease, just a foot-long filled with vegetables and familiarity. But by 2024, over 1,000 Subway locations had shut down across North America. In Canada, losses struck hardest in British Columbia and Quebec, and perhaps most telling, traffic from Canadian visitors to U.S. subways plummeted nearly 30%. But there was no scandal, no breaking news story, just small doubts that piled up over time. Was that turkey really fresh? Was that bread really whole grain? One day you noticed the lettuce seemed limp. Another day, you read a post online about how some of their meat didn't meet basic quality standards. And while Subway sat still, brands like Freshii and Tim Hortons in Canada pushed forward. Local, clean, proudly Canadian, Subway, clinging to a vision of freshness that had stopped evolving, quietly fell behind. And now, The impact is felt most by those who depended on it the most. Elderly folks on fixed incomes, once able to grab a 6-inch turkey on wheat with a cup of soup, now walk into dark storefronts. In blue-collar towns, where a Subway might have been the only healthy-ish option, the windows are boarded up, nothing's broken, but nothing's alive. And that's perhaps the most haunting image of all, because when even a sandwich can't promise what it used to, what else are we supposed to count on number 3? Dunkin. What happens to a country when even your morning coffee turns cold before it's poured for millions of Americans? Dunkin wasn't just a caffeine stop, but a soft sense of belonging, a $2 cup that carried memories, familiar faces, and a sense that, whatever the day may bring, at least this part was still the same. But in 2025, even that familiar rhythm is slipping, and part of that unraveling begins at the northern border. Between 2022 and 2024, according to verified data from Placer.ai, foot traffic to Dunkin' stores near the U.S.-Canada border fell by as much as 25%. Not just one town, but a regional erosion felt across Vermont, New Hampshire, and upstate New York. And the most unsettling part, it wasn't American customers who changed. It was Canadian ones who quietly walked away. For years, cross-border towns had relied on Canadian visitors, early morning shoppers, weekday commuters, families heading south for groceries or weekend drives, and Dunkin' was always there. But as Canada's dollar weakens, fuel costs rise, and younger Canadians favor local artisan cafes over American fast coffee chains, the relationship frayed. Dunkin' didn't shift. And so, Canada did. Now. The ripple effects stretch deep into American soil. In places where a Dunkin' once anchored the day, lights now flicker off early. Small towns lose jobs, routines, and connections. Older workers, especially retirees picking up a few shifts to stay afloat or being sent home. Immigrant employees, often clinging to these roles as a rare financial foothold, now face shrinking hours and closing doors. And what used to be comfort, an orange chair, a glazed donut, a seat by the window, is now just an empty corner behind frosted glass. In one Vermont plaza, a former Dunkin' has been sealed behind brick. This wasn't a trade war, just a slow retreat of Canadian presence. And with it, a collapse of something many never thought would fade. Because when even Dunkin' disappears quietly, the loss isn't just a coffee shop. It could be the end of a small American promise. Have you noticed, has your Dunkin' changed? Share your memory before we move on, because the next story may hit even closer to home. Number 4, McDonald's. What happens when the symbol of the American dream begins to disappear just because a trusted friend quietly walks away? In 2024, McDonald's reported a staggering 19% revenue drop in Quebec. Ontario followed suit with similar declines. It's hard to believe, considering that only a few years ago, McDonald's had over 1,400 restaurants across Canada and was widely cherished. For generations, Canadians didn't just eat McDonald's, they lived with it. It was the first stop on family road trips, the warm light still shining at midnight after a long drive home. But those lights now flicker in emptier rooms. The golden arches still glow, but they no longer pull people in, especially not Canadians. Why, part of the answer is economics, post-COVID thriftiness, a Canadian dollar that buys less and less, skyrocketing fuel and food costs that leave fewer dollars for a quick bite. But the rest of the answer lies in values. Across social media, Canadian Gen Z voices are leading a quiet revolution. Movements like Stop Eating Ultra-Processed Food have turned fast food into the enemy of self-care. For this new generation, McDonald's is a compromise, and the loss doesn't stop at the border. It spills into America's northern towns, places where weekend traffic from Canadian shoppers once kept the drive-thru humming. With fewer visitors, local stores see revenue collapse, staff lose hours, then jobs. A McDonald's that shuts down in a border town isn't just another fast food closure, but the last affordable breakfast, the last safe place open past 10 p.m., and when that's gone, the void is more than just hunger. McDonald's was once an ambassador of American ease and welcome, but now, in the eyes of a shifting Canada, it's become a relic of a past they no longer share. If McDonald's, the giant, can be gently turned away by the very neighbor it once comforted, then what else in our lives is quietly slipping through the cracks? Don't look away, because number 5 brings something even stranger. Number 5, Burger King. What happens when the last place that made you feel like you had a say just disappears? Without even saying goodbye, Burger King wasn't just another fast food joint. For decades, it was the place where the everyday American felt heard. Its iconic promise, "Have it your way," was a comforting reassurance that you still had some control, that no matter what was happening in the world, at least here, your preferences mattered. From suburban malls to lonely gas stations off the highway, Burger King was there, like an old friend in a familiar booth. At its peak, it stood tall with over 11,000 restaurants globally, serving over 11 million people every day. But in 2023, the cracks started showing. Over 400 U.S. locations shut their doors, and in Canada, the signs came down too, but with even less noise. In provinces like Ontario and Alberta, Burger King slowly disappeared from shopping centers that had once depended on its draw. What took its place? Local chains like Harvey's, and Canadian-grown success stories like A&W brands that felt cleaner, clearer, and simply more Canadian. The crown didn't fall. It was gently set down and forgotten. The reasons aren't locked inside corporate reports. They're sitting in the front seat of every Canadian car. People aren't crossing the border like they used to. Gas is too expensive. The Canadian dollar is struggling. And young Canadians want food that looks like it came from a kitchen, not a conveyor belt. Burger King didn't change, and Canada simply moved on. But what's left in the silence? For older Americans, the disappearance of Burger King feels like more than just a closure. Seniors who still clip paper coupons, workers who don't want to wrestle with confusing apps, small towns where, after 9 p.m., the only place open was a Burger King with tired lights but a hot sandwich waiting. And now those lights are off. The breakup from Canada isn't just about profit, but a cultural retreat, a decision made by silence and distance. Because when even a Whopper becomes too far away, what does that say about who still gets to feel seen in this country? The ads may keep running, but if no one's left in the booth to hear them, then the real loss isn't the burger, it's the illusion that we ever truly mattered. Number 6, Starbucks. No protests, no loud headlines, just doors that don't reopen and chairs that no longer welcome anyone. This is how the most iconic coffee brand on earth begins to vanish, from the very places that once trusted it the most, for decades. Starbucks wasn't just where you got your morning caffeine fix. It was a modern signal, a quiet luxury, a $6 cup that said, "You belong here, you've made it," in both downtown Toronto and the frosty sidewalks of Buffalo. That green siren was a symbol of a shared, globalized pace of life. But by 2023, that feeling had begun to drift. In Canada alone, 144 Starbucks locations closed in just 1 year. Since 2020, North America has seen over 400 vanish, and the heaviest losses hit border towns. That movement is gone. Gen Z Canadians, with their climate awareness and preference for local goods, are skipping corporate chains in favor of eco-focused independent cafes. And practical realities have set and gas prices are high. The Canadian dollar is weak, and long drives for a cup of coffee no longer feel worth it. On the American side, the pain is just as real. Older adults, retirees, and middle-class workers now weigh each Starbucks trip against their prescriptions and groceries. For many, the guilt is heavier than the coffee. The Starbucks cup used to feel warm. Now, it feels distant. In office parks, workers brew coffee at home and skip the detour. On quiet streets, elderly regulars glance at the menu, pause at the price, and keep walking. In Vancouver, a once thriving Starbucks on Robson Street now stands empty. What hurts isn't just the closures. It's the feeling that something shared between Canada and the U.S. is being lost. Starbucks wasn't only American, it was embraced by Canada, woven into the rhythm of both nations. Its rejection isn't angry, it's silent. And somehow, that silence feels more painful, because when even the safe choice isn't safe anymore, what are we supposed to lean on? Maybe it's not the latte we're mourning. Maybe it's the quiet truth that we're no longer moving forward. At least, not together. Number 7, Olive Garden. You don't feel the loss all at once. It begins with one missing breadstick, one refill that never comes, one empty booth where laughter used to live. That's how Olive Garden is fading, not in protest, but in quiet absence. Between 2022 and 2024, over 100 Olive Garden locations closed across the U.S., including in border cities like Buffalo, Seattle, and Detroit places once filled with visiting Canadian families, for many. A weekend trip to Olive Garden was more than a meal. It was tradition, but the cost of gas rose, the Canadian dollar weakened, and those once famous unlimited soup and breadstick deals became rare or vanished entirely. The result, fewer families crossing the border, fewer reasons to stay loyal, and Olive Garden didn't evolve. While Gen Z customers chased seasonal menus, farm-to-table values, and custom options, Olive Garden stayed frozen in the past, familiar, but no longer fulfilling, slowly. Even longtime guests began drifting away, both in the U.S. and Canada. But what's truly disappearing isn't the food, it's the feeling. Olive Garden was a bridge between generations, between incomes, between nations, grandparents, parents. And kids could sit at one table, share one basket of breadsticks, and feel equal. That mattered more than marinara. Now that bridge is breaking, in Buffalo. A family arrived on Thanksgiving to find their local Olive Garden closed, lights out, and a closed until further notice sign taped to the door. No birthday meal, no gathering, just the cold reflection of a family staring back at themselves through glass. When even Olive Garden, once the warmest symbol of middle-class comfort, can't hold its place. We lose more than dinner. We lose rituals. We lose gathering spaces. We lose the quiet dignity of feeling welcome without needing to spend a fortune. What we're really mourning isn't just a restaurant. It's the memory of what it felt like to belong somewhere. Number 8, Red Lobster. Once a place for birthdays, anniversaries, and Friday night joy. Red Lobster now sits eerily quiet. In May 2024, the brand filed for bankruptcy, shuttering over 120 U.S. locations in Canada. It nearly vanished, gone from Toronto, Alberta, Ontario, where it once had more than 50 restaurants. The downfall, a brutal mix of inflation, pandemic scars, and a weakened Canadian dollar. Imported seafood like lobster and shrimp became luxuries. A family dinner now tops $100, pushing Red Lobster beyond the reach of the very families it once welcomed. What stings most is what's gone with it, the working class celebration. Red Lobster used to mean we made it. Now, those milestones pass quietly at home, in small Canadian and border towns. Its absence isn't just about food, it's about memory, tradition, and something soft that held communities together. The booths are empty, the laughter is gone, and in its place, silence, rising prices, and fewer reasons to celebrate. If even Red Lobster couldn't survive the silent goodbye from Canadian diners, what hope is left for places built on affordable joy? Number 9, Applebees. It was never fancy. That's exactly why it mattered. Applebees wasn't about gourmet plates or Instagram filters. It was where you went when you didn't want to think too hard, just grab dinner, split an appetizer, and maybe catch the game. A place for truckers, young couples, retirees, for people who needed comfort, not spectacle. But by early 2025, Applebees had closed over 100 locations compared to pre-pandemic levels, in border states like Michigan, New York, and Washington. Canadian traffic dropped over 15%. Rising costs pushed a simple dinner for $2 to nearly $50. And with fewer Canadians crossing the border, the booths grew quieter. Applebee's didn't adapt. No sleek delivery apps, no menu shakeups. And now, the second kitchen for America's working class is slowly dimming. Lights go out, staff get laid off, familiar faces vanish, the comfort of a regular booth, a cheap beer, and a place that didn't ask you to dress up, that's all fading. When even Applebee's no longer fits into normal life. What does that say about how far we've drifted from what used to feel like home? Number 10, IHOP. There was a time when pancakes meant connection. IHOP wasn't just breakfast, it was a pause in the week, a reason to gather, a booth filled with 3 generations, a never-empty coffee cup, and the simple joy of maple syrup on a Sunday morning. But between 2022 and 2024, over 90 IHOP locations shut down across the U.S., many in border towns once bustling with Canadian visitors. In some regions, revenue dropped 18%. The quiet cause, Canada stopped coming. Rising egg, milk, and flour prices turned an $8 breakfast into a $15 splurge. The Canadian dollar weakened, fuel got expensive, and families, already stretched thin, stopped crossing the border for pancakes. What's left are cold tables and silent mornings. Young people now chase trendy brunch spots. Older folks skip the meal entirely, choosing prescriptions over pancakes. IHOP used to mark the start of a good day. Now, It's vanishing like the morning mist. And if even breakfast, the simplest comfort, can no longer be shared, then what part of the American weekend is still truly ours? Number 11. Dennys. For generations, Dennys meant one thing: always open. No matter the hour or highway, it was there serving pancakes at 2 a.m., offering a seat to rest, and reminding you that something in the world was still steady. But between 2022 and 2024, over 60 Dennys locations closed across America, many near the Canadian border. Towns once kept alive by cross-border brunches now sit silent. Canadians stopped visiting, held back by border restrictions, weak currency, and rising gas prices. And then came the rest. Gen Z turned to trendier cafes. Retirees cut back, even the regulars. Those who once knew the servers by name slowly stopped returning. Now, the neon signs flicker less. Some diners are shuttered, counters sit empty. A long road trip used to end with eggs and coffee. Now it ends in a dark parking lot. Dennys wasn't elegant, but it was ours. It was the constant. And now, that quiet constant is slipping away. If even Dennys, the diner that never closed, can disappear without notice, what else might be leaving us quietly? Number 12. Buffalo Wild Wings. It used to sound like thunder cheering fans, clinking glasses, and that unmistakable roar when the home team scored. For years, Buffalo Wild Wings was more than a wing joint. It was a stadium in disguise, a gathering ground for anyone who believed that sports meant more when shared. In places like Buffalo, Spokane, and Detroit, the buzz spilled out into parking lots. Super Bowl Sunday felt like a holiday. You didn't just eat, you belonged. But by 2025, that roar turned into a whisper. Over 100 stores closed. Foot traffic from Canada collapsed by over a third. Inspire Brands quietly admitted in 2023 that border locations were bleeding money. Reddit threads turned bitter: too expensive, too crowded, too cold. And then came the price tags. Wings that once cost under $1 soared to nearly $2. A cold beer cost as much as a meal. Canadians responded by staying home, with places like Boston Pizza and the Canadian Brew House offering the same energy without the drama. They didn't need us anymore. And the final blow: a viral video showing discrimination against Asian fans in Ohio. For many, that was it. What once united us, food, fandom, friendship, is now fading into silence. Number 13. The Cheesecake Factory. There was a time when walking into the Cheesecake Factory felt like stepping into something grand. Dim chandeliers, velvet booths, and the smell of something warm and rich in the air. It wasn't just dinner, it was an event for Canadian families. It was often the centerpiece of a cross-border escape. Toronto moms, Vancouver couples, Montreal retirees, they'd drive hours, dress up, and spend the kind of money that made a night feel special. But now it's quiet. The chandeliers still sparkle, but they shine over empty booths and waiters with no one to serve. Revenue at border locations fell 12% in 2024. Vacant tables went up by over a quarter. Canadians, once proud regulars, now call it a ghost of good times on social media. In Buffalo, a server sighed. Saturdays used to be wild. Now we just fold napkins. What happened? Canada grew its own answers. Earls, Moxies, Jack Astor's sleek, modern, cheaper. And then came the scandal. In 2022, the company got caught hiding over $150 million in losses. Staff spoke of unpaid overtime and elderly workers being pushed out. When dessert becomes a symbol of decline, you know something deeper is missing. Number 14. Salt Bae. There was a time when a single flick of salt could make people cross oceans. Not for food, but for the moment. For the camera flash. For that glittering steak dipped in gold and ego. Salt Bae wasn't just a chef, he was a performance. A myth made viral. His New Surette restaurants in Miami and Las Vegas weren't dining rooms. They were stages where middle-class families from Canada once paid nearly $300 per person just to say, we were there. But something shifted. Between 2022 and 2024, the shine wore off. The Las Vegas branch saw revenue fall 22%. A viral video from a Canadian family over $1,000 for 3 plates and a 40-minute wait for water sparked more laughter than envy. What once looked aspirational now felt absurd. Then came the cracks beneath the glitter. That awkward World Cup moment with Messi. The headlines about exploited workers. The hashtags calling for boycotts. Canadians didn't shout, they just stopped coming. American seniors who once saw it as a bucket list stop now feel duped. Young workers who relied on weekend shifts let go, quietly, when the illusion breaks. No amount of gold can glue it back together. Canada didn't hold a protest. They didn't call for a boycott. They simply stopped buying, and that silence was louder than any headline. In just 2 years, brands that once shaped America's daily life, McDonald's, Dunkin, Red Lobster, are slipping away. Not because of war, nor scandal, but because a trusted friend quietly walked away. No anger, just absence. For many Americans, each fast food brand lost is more than a closed restaurant. It's a piece of memory gone. A Friday night dinner, a coffee before work, a pancake after church. These weren't just meals. They were rituals, anchors of identity. If Canada, our most familiar neighbor, has chosen to let go, who else will follow? And what will be left of the America we once believed in?